All right. Caesar, give me something that we could use if we were contextualizing period 6, sir.
Monopoly, sure.
Monopolies is going to happen in this area, yes? But if we're talking about background information for all this economic change, what's happened before this time period that helps us better understand how we got here, so to speak? Is there a previous economic revolution that helps us explain kind of how we got here? Market Revolution, absolutely. Right, so you can add that to your list. The Market Revolution, early American industrialization. I'd add that if I were you. That's good background info for you. Need a pen? You good? All right. Cool, cool. Thank you, Caesar. Thank you, Caesar. D-Money, what else? Ooh!
Their supplies. But
Good.
then once they start becoming more dependent, they have to figure out their own stuff.
Okay, so this idea of economic independence, not relying on other countries, absolutely. Right? Fun fact, in this era, we're going to go from being a net importing nation, meaning we buy more from other countries than we sell to other countries. In this time period, that's going to flip. And we're going to be a bigger exporter to other countries than we buy. Good point. How about immigration? Does immigration help us understand better industrialization a little bit? Which two groups immigrate to the U.S. before and during this time period we could use? Irish and German, right? That's good. There we go. Absolutely. How about internal improvements? What are some examples of infrastructure that help us explain how we got here? Cotton gin, sure. So early machinery, that works, Raphael. Thank you. Sure. Spinning jenny, absolutely. What else? Steamboats. Yeah, canals. Absolutely. Absolutely. Good. Good, good, good. So you guys gotta understand that all that helps us explain how we got to this situation at this point in which after the Civil War, the U.S. is expanding rapidly, economically, demographically, socially, etc. So this is my list. Market Revolution. Good job. I know you guys had it over there. I know you guys had it over here. Market Revolution and early industrialization, and I added, this is regional specific. Right? This largely takes place in the Northeast. Growth of immigration. You guys already nailed this one too, right? The Germans and the Irish, right? And then we're going to see in this unit a whole bunch of new immigration from Southern and Eastern Europe. We'll say that for next week. I think also worth noting, westward expansion, because that's going to continue into this time period. Right? The fact that we're growing westward, that's causing sectionalism, Mexican-American War, annexation of Texas, native conflicts, Indian removal. There's great context for this, because as you read from the chapter that was due on Wednesday, we're going to see a shift in Native American policies and a bunch of new native conflicts and wars. What you guys missed is the Civil War and the expansion of federal authority that we'll talk about today. Homestead Act, Pacific Railway Act, right? The government using the power of the government to facilitate economic growth under that Republican Party ideology like the old Whigs and the Federalists. Reconstruction and the expansion of federal authority is a good one to use as well, because both Civil War and Reconstruction show a growth in the power of the federal government. And that is, of course, all I came up with. So we'll get some more practice with this in our second semester, of me giving you a topic and asking you to contextualize it. Give me some good background information that better explains how it is we got to this situation. Today we're going to kick off period 6 with a quick lecture, short day today on Wednesday, on the American West in the age of industry. As we've talked about in this class before, the idea of the American West has evolved over time. Right, we'll go back to American independence. The West is like here. You with me? Then the Louisiana Purchase, and the West is here. And then the annexation of Texas and the the Mexican-American War and the Mexican Cession, and the West is here. So the West has evolved over time. It is in this time period that we see what Americans at the time call the closing of the frontier. Meaning there is no more unexplored, undeveloped, unsettled area in America, and instead we've kind of gone all the way to the Pacific Ocean, and the frontier that we've discussed really since Bacon's Rebellion, the Paxton Boys, the Proclamation of 1763, the frontier, the idea of an undeveloped West, is no more. All right, so I want you to use your reading. I know if you already turned it in, good for you. You should still know what the hell's in there. Use your reading. Look at these 2 newspaper advertisements. Talk to each other, and tell each other What developments, plural, are reflected in these two advertisements? And how did each of these developments contribute to westward expansion after the Civil War? Take two. Both of these reflect a different development in this era. What is the development? What is the thing that's happening that makes these make sense? And how did both contribute to westward expansion? Take two, work together, discuss it, use your reading if you need to. But ideally, you've locked it in your brain because you already read it. 2 minutes, go. Go, dive in. Dive in, dive in, dive in. Come on, guys. Shout me out. Good. Good job, Caesar. Good. Good. What do we have here? What do we have here? Okay, chat me out. Chat me out. Chat me out. Work together. Have a conversation. Do you guys want your chapters back so you can use them? Would that be helpful? There you go. See if I can do it. What we got? What is like millions of acres of land are available for settlement? Why? What makes all these acres available for settlement? What did the government do that made all this land available for settlement? How about it? What made all this land available to settle? What did the government do? Again, a law that is passed that facilitates it. Good. There you go. Talk about it. Good. Jumping? Awesome. Ralph, did you jump or do it? Ralph, did you jump or do it? Exactly. I'm going to start the semester this way. I'm going to start the semester this way. So he's here with answers, and you're just here what? Oh man, it's day one. It's day one. All right. So here on my left-hand side, I have 2 million farms of fertile prairie lands to be had free of cost. 30 million acres. Ariel, what did the government do? What's passed that makes all this land available for settlement? Thank you, Ariel, the Homestead Act. Right? So the Homestead Act, in which the government says 160 acres of land per family, all you gotta do is go settle it. You just move there, you go live there, out here in the Midwest, the middle of the country, and that land is yours. 160 acres is a lot of land. It's a lot of land. It's almost like here to USC. A lot of land for free. Good. So how does that contribute to westward expansion? I think it's pretty straightforward. I mean, it's free. So what do people do? They're going to go out there. Absolutely. Rich people, poor people, middle class people? Who? Are rich people going to go out there? No. No. Right? But we're going to see like everyday people, the yeomanry, so to speak. Oh, there they are again. Right, spreading westward. And of course, the Homestead Act is passed by Republicans during the Civil War to facilitate westward expansion of a free soil ideology. The one on the right, I think, is incredibly offensive, but it's also incredibly worth discussing. Right? Indian land for sale. Get a home of your own, easy payments, perfect title, possession within 30 days, find lands in the West. All right, this many thousands of acres in all these states: Colorado, Idaho, Kansas, Montana, Nebraska, North Dakota, Oklahoma. So all these states, land is available. That are irrigated land, grazing land for cattle, agricultural land for farming. What makes all this land available? Use your chapter, use what you read, use what you came to class with today, if you came to class with knowledge today. What made this possible? What does the government do that facilitates this idea of seizing Indian lands? Jules, help us out. What does the government do that allows this Indian land to be available for purchase? What happens that allows white settlers to take Indian land? And this is the thing in the second semester, guys. I'm going to need you to come in with like knowledge from your chapters so that I'm not telling you stuff that you already read. Because you read it, you wrote it down. What happens? What does the government do that allows people to take Indian lands? You forgot to review your questions. Review your questions. That's what they're there for. That's what they're there for. Hannah, help us out. What does the government do that allows white Americans to settle on Indian land?
Was it the place?
Yes. The Dawes Act.
Dawn?
Perfect. All right, that's one example, the Dawes Act, which is going to put Native Americans on small reservations. That opens up land. Good job. All right, how about like a more confrontational situation? Caesar, help us out.
It's like conflict?
Yeah, Indian Wars. Indian Wars, and then are going to lead to the Dawes Act, which moves Indians onto small reservations and makes all their lands that were previously theirs available for purchase. And again, how does that facilitate westward expansion? What does it open up?
Land.
Louder.
Land.
Land, right? More land that is good land that is then opened up for settlement. So there are a few factors, a few developments that facilitate the closing of the frontier. And I made you a box for all of them. We have government policies, which we already discussed a few. We have railroad expansion, right? You can't move out westward without infrastructure to make that easy. We have improved technology, some of which we saw in the video on Wednesday, all three of us. We have mining and cattle, and then a question about what ties all of this together. So when I say government policies, the few that you should know that help encourage westward expansion, the first is the Homestead Act. Homestead Act is passed in 1863. And like we just talked about, it allows settlers to get basically free land just from moving westward and settling in unsettled lands. The second government policy to note is the Morrill Land Grant Act. The Morrill, M-O-R-R-I-L-L, the Morrill Land Grant Act, which is going to give federal land to the states so they can establish colleges, public universities. That's going to encourage westward expansion because education is important. Fun fact, the University of California, the first one being at Berkeley, but the rest of the UCs, UC Davis, UCLA, UC Riverside, UC Santa Cruz, all great schools, fantastic. UC San Diego, UC Santa Barbara, all great schools. Those are public universities. And the University of California is first established because of the Morrill Land Grant Act. Federal land that they own being given to the state so they can establish public universities. Maybe the most important one is the Pacific Railway Act, to build a transcontinental railroad connecting east and west. Passed during the Civil War, of course, the railroad takes about 7 years to complete. And then we have a railroad right across the country that connects east and west, and that facilitates westward expansion because infrastructure is important. One thing to note here, the government does not actually pay these railroad companies to build the railroad. They give them what's called subsidies or land. Government gives them land alongside the railroad that they can then sell to build the railroad. So it's important to add that as well, the idea of subsidies. The government's going to subsidize it, meaning pay for it, but not paying for it in cash, paying for it in land that the railroad companies can then sell. It's going to very much incentivize them to sell this land. And of course, the Transcontinental Railroad is finished in 1869. We'll build 3 other transcontinental railroads in the next 10, 15 years, and the country will be very much more interconnected because of railroads. And the last government policy we already identified is the Dawes Act. The Dawes Act is the fourth, which is going to open even more land for settlement by removing Native Americans and putting them on reservations instead. putting them on reservations instead. Alright, so having massive lands given to Native Americans, and having that land taken away, and trying to encourage Native Americans to be sedentary, to farm. And we'll talk about that at the end of class today. Next factor is the railroad, pretty straightforward. I have some data for you though. To go from the Mississippi River to the West Coast, before 1860, cost $1,000. After the railroads built in 1870, it costs approximately $65. Look at that deduction in price. It's crazy cheaper to move west because the railroads are completed and move westward. Those of us who remember Wednesday, who's our railroad guy?
Vanderbilt.
Vanderbilt, good. And then Jay Gould and others as well, but Vanderbilt's the big one. It's not even just the money though, the time. You don't have to write this down, guys, as long as you know railroad expansion makes a big deal. Time to travel west before 1860 was about 4 to 6 months to get to the West Coast. That's a long time, usually in a wagon train. Right? You get on a wagon, covered wagon, you get a buffalo or a horse to pull you, you do your thing. A mule, all the way to the West Coast. What do you guys think after the railroads built? How long does it take? Any guesses?
Wait, what?
It used to be 4 to 6 months. How long is it going to be after the railroads built?
Like,
Let's find out. 1 week. 1 week! So from 6 months to 1 week. That's crazy. And the third factor is improved machinery technology. You can add the railroad there. That's one example of improved technology, improved machinery. But it's not just the railroad. It's not just the railroad, right? It's also next to the railroad is laid a transcontinental telegraph. Because communication is important. You're not going to move out all the way west if you can't know where to ship your goods or how to get goods. Telegraphs are important. So it's the telegraph and the railroad that runs across the whole country. Other examples of technology included are barbed wire. Because barbed wire allows for farming to be a little more secure and safe, right? The animals don't all run out or run in. There's new farm equipment that makes it easier to farm out in the middle of the country where farming is hard. The soil sucks, there's not enough rain, it's too sunny. That's not fertile land like the Chesapeake was back in the day. But new technology like self-binding harvesters, more steel plows, I've done that before. A combine, new technology that combines a reaper and a thresher. It's all farm equipment. You can just say advances in farm equipment. And you're good there. It makes it easier to farm in places where farming is challenging, where farming is more difficult. And the last two are the mining industry and the cattle industry that both draw people westward. Now we obviously last year too, we talked about the gold rush in California in 1849. That's just one of many mineral rushes westward. We're going to see gold found, of course, in California, but also in Idaho, which is right here. Also in the Dakotas, which is right there. So that's going to bring people westward trying to get rich on gold. That's going to facilitate the closing of the frontier. We're going to see massive silver deposits that are found in Nevada. That's our little neighbor here to the east. Silver deposits in Nevada, silver deposits in Oregon, silver deposits in Colorado. That's going to bring people westward as well. In the mining industries, as you read about. And the last factor is the cattle boom. America's always had lots of wild cows, wild steers, those giant cows with the big old horns. After the Civil War, we begin rounding those cows up, putting them on ranches where they can graze, using trains to ship them, using refrigerated rail cars to keep the meat safe and secure, and then distributing meat out of the country as America becomes a much bigger beef-eating country. When's the last time y'all had beef? Yesterday, yeah. Carne asada, hamburgers, ground beef, steaks. America's really not a beef-eating country prior to this. A lot of pork, a lot of turkey. Pigs and turkeys. In this era, because of all the wild steers that are here, they begin being carved up onto ranches with barbed wire. And then cowboys, as you read, drive them north to the rail lines. Rail lines take them to Chicago, and Chicago becomes the meat packing center of the country, where they'll then ship out all the beef from factories to the rest of the country. Good. Yes, ma'am.
Why isn't like oil part of it?
Why isn't oil?
Yeah.
Good question. Oil largely is going to be found here, where we already are. Somewhat in Texas, but a little bit later. Good question. Oil is going to be kind of a lagging indicator on westward expansion. It's going to help fuel trains and the like, but it's not going to be a reason to move westward. Good question, though. All right, as you saw in the video on Wednesday, Carnegie centers his oil location here in Ohio, Cleveland. Right? We've had Ohio since the Revolutionary War. That's part of the Treaty of Paris. Know those ordinances. Cool. Good question, though. Good question. So this is what it looks like. Check me out, guys. I got gold deposits. I got silver deposits. I got trains to show you. It's all on one map. It's beautiful. Right? So we have all the railroads. We have a northern terminus of the transcontinental. Gracias. We have a more centralized terminal of the transcontinental railroad. We have a more southern, there's LA, there we go, a southern terminal of the transcontinental railroad that crisscross the whole country. And as you can see, a lot of the mining is along railroads. Right, they're going to find the gold and silver and then build a railroad that then connects those mines to the rest of the country. Right, we have gold here, that's the original gold rush, silver in Virginia City. Idaho's got gold and silver found. Colorado's got both found. South Dakota's got gold found. And then we also have the cattle trails. Right, cattle will be gathered up on ranches here in Texas. You been to the University of Texas, UT? Their mascot, Longhorns, giant cattle, right, to this day. There you go. Right, and all these trails are going to move northward to connect the cows with the trains. Build the cows on the trains, ship them where? Where do all these trains go almost? All will go to Chicago, right, the meat packing center of the country, and then that beef will get sent out. Here's one example. I showed you a harvesting machine, right, farm equipment. Nice little picture for you. If you're curious what it looks like, that's a harvester. All right, this guy can just sit there, and as you can see, it picks the wheat and it ties it up. All right, fancy technology makes farming easier. And there's barbed wire. That's an advertisement from the 1880s. Protect your stock, the cows, by using safety barbed wire. I'm not quite sure how safe it is because it's barbed wire, but hey. The best, safest, and cheapest wire fence in use. The only safe wire for your horses. Cool, thanks. Now, go ahead and take a minute with your partner. I want you to think about that last question in the last box. What one development did each of these factors rely on? What's the one thing that connects all of this? The mines, the cattle, the farming. What's the one thing that ties all of this together? Take 30 seconds, talk to each other, discuss it, have an actual conversation this time. What connects all of this? Go for it. Dive in. Chat me out. Joel's turn around. Chat me out. What connects all of this? What's the one thing that makes all of this possible? What do you guys think? Sure. Land's always been there. What development makes all of this possible? Mining. Yes. What's the example of it? Good. There you go. Good job. What do you girls think? What makes all of this possible?
Makes mining possible, the farming possible, the cattle possible. It's one thing that we have to make it all work. Sure, look at the map though. What's the one thing that makes everything connect, makes everything valuable? Good. There you go. Good job. Good job.
Alright, saw you guys there. Team Pressing? You had the answer first. Thank you, kid. What's the one development that actually facilitates the rest of all of this? Railroads. Right, without railroads, we're not going to spread out westward this far because we can't ship our farm goods back. We're not going to go out mining because we can't get the mine goods back. We're not going to move out to the plains on the Homestead Act because we can't get our materials there or back. We're not going to turn cattle into big money because we can't get the cows anywhere. And there we go. Right? So it's important that you guys recognize the importance of railroads in this unit as facilitating all the other examples of economic growth. Now there's two sets of challenges if you turn your page, just for railroads. There's two big sets of challenges that these farmers that move west face. Two big sets of challenges, and I want you to be aware of both of them, because we're going to come back to these challenges at the end of this unit with what's called the populist movement. Challenge one is a natural challenge, right? We can't do nothing about this. That's the way God made it, or biology, one or the other. That's the quality of land. The land that people are getting on the Homestead Act is in fact not as promised. It's not amazing. It's not this awesome farm. They're in the middle of the country. Anybody ever taken a flight over the whole country? Like to the East Coast? Or driven to like Texas? It's flat. It's the desert. There's nothing there. It's sand. It's cactus. It's grass. It's nothing. So the first challenge they face is a natural challenge, and it's a challenge of land. The land is not great for farming, which is not the best case scenario to move out and farm. So the irrigation is hard. There's not a lot of natural rivers and waters in the middle of the country out there. The soil is not great. This area becomes known as the Great Plains. The Great Plains. But it's originally called the Great American Desert. Who wants to sign up to go farm in what's called the Great American Desert? Anybody? You down to go farm in the desert? No. What grows in the desert? Nothing. Lizards, cactus, yeah, right? The Great American Desert, as one settler calls it. They then call it the Great Plains because that sounds a little more attractive. Sounds a little bit less intimidating, the Great American Desert. So what we're going to see farmers do instead is some new techniques called dry farming, which again doesn't sound very good. If you're going to plant a vegetable in your backyard, what's the first thing you're going to do to it? Leave it dry? No. Oh, water. There goes a dry farming, in which they dig super deep to get to where and plant their seeds way deeper where there's still some moisture, less chance of evaporation. But again, that then uses deeper soil, which is not great long term. They're going to build dams to dam up and preserve the water, and they're going to do man-made irrigation. They're going to build like little individual canals to bring water to these farms where the irrigation is not natural and they don't get enough rainwater to water their crops naturally. I'll put a little smiley face here, keep this in mind for period 7. The over-cultivation, the over-farming of this land, this digging things deeper and deeper and using all the soil you can, that's going to have consequences later. It's going to have consequences later, which we'll talk about in period 7 with the Dust Bowl. Those are natural challenges, right? That's just the world that they're settling in that's not ideal for the type of farming they want to do to get rich. But there's also man-made challenges, challenges they put upon themselves. And I want you to know 2 challenges that are important. The first is debt. And the second is railroads. Debt and railroads. And by railroads, I mean railroad exploitation. We'll talk about here in a second. Look at this piece of machinery. Does this look cheap or expensive in the 1880s? Expensive. But do you feel like if you're a farmer out in the frontier, you need this to keep up?
Yeah.
Probably, right? So the problem for farmers is they're going to not have to, but in some ways have to buy new expensive equipment, right? New plows, new machinery, new equipment, new this, new that, just to keep up. And then when you owe a lot of money, what do you do with your crops? Do you plant more or less? More or less? More. And when you plant more, then you're overproducing. And then in that way, sometimes you drive prices down because you have too much of it, supply and demand. So because farmers have bought expensive goods, they need to plant more to pay their bills, but then by planting more, they drive their own prices down. Not great. Second problem, debt-wise, we're going to see a bunch of what's called in this era bonanza farms. Meaning big business farms. Big companies that will buy up a bunch of good land and plant everything. So little family farms, owned by families under the Homestead Act, have a hard time keeping up. Man-made challenges. Right? Those aren't natural challenges. Those are challenges by human action. And I say man-made, not woman-made, because women never make mistakes. It's important that we note that.
Yeah.
It's important, but I got you. It's true, Raphael, I'm sorry. And the third problem is railroad exploitation. Go back to Wednesday. What's the one thing that makes our economy work? It's a C word. Competition. Now, if you were a farmer in the middle of nowhere, let's pick a state, Nebraska, you're right there, and you got to ship your goods to Chicago. How many railroads close to you go to Chicago? One. So what can that railroad do to you?
Charge high prices.
Charge high prices. What can you do about it? Nothing. Right? So when I say railroad exploitation, what I mean is the railroads are going to exploit these farmers by charging high prices, by changing their rates when they feel like it, by making it very challenging for farmers to plan how much the rates are going to be next year. But because farmers are dependent on these railroads, they have no other way to get their goods to market. Because these farmers are dependent on railroads, that allows the railroads to put in place unfair and unpredictable pricing. Unpredictable and unfair pricing. Because there's no competition for the railroads. The railroads are competing with each other, but you're not going to build two tracks next to each other. When there's no competition, go back to Wednesday's scenario, who's supposed to step in and regulate things? The government. The government, right? The government should tell the railroads what they can and can't charge, but the government's not going to do that, which we'll talk about later in this unit because the government is in bed with big business. There we go. And this is a good map that kind of shows you what's happening in the West. We see farming and ranching. Ranching means, of course, raising cows, cattle, other livestock happening here in the middle. Mining out this way. Some farming out here in California. It kind of shows that what's happening as we spread westward, and now you can see why by the end of this era we say there's no more frontier, right? Because we've come all the way westward to either farm, to mine, to ranch. So the farmer response is important to these problems. And this will again come full circle at the end of this unit. The farmer response is key. The first thing farmers will do is form what's called the Granger movement. The Granger movement. And I want you to note, the Granger movement is very social. It's a social movement because farmers are largely isolated, they're on their own, they're independent, they don't have a lot of social interactions and social connection building. And the Granger movement is going to build something of a safe space for farmers to come together, to vent about their problems, to build relationships and collaboratives together. It's social gatherings. To build community, to reduce isolation, to educate each other on farm solutions, farm problems. The Granger movement is very social. So if we all come together in one space, right? And I'm bitching about my problems, and Francine has the same problems, Hannah has the same problems, Caesar has the same problems. All of a sudden, what are we going to start doing? If we realize we all have the same problems? Doing something about it. Yeah. So what we're going to see come out of the Granger movement is organization. We're going to start as farmers voting together for representatives who support our interests. What's one thing from your chapter, or when we just talked about last slide, what's one thing farmers might ask for from the government to do? What? Not more railroads, but regulate the railroads, regulate the businesses. Right? Tell these railroads they can't charge us these unfair rates. Because those rates are screwing me, they're screwing Francine, they're screwing Hannah, they're screwing Caesar. So they're going to vote for representatives who support their interests, the interests of farmers, what farmers want. And that's going to lead to Granger laws. Granger laws where state governments, the government of Nebraska, the government of Iowa, the government of Colorado, are going to set maximum prices. They're going to set maximum prices for both railroad and crop storage. They're going to set maximum prices, which is what farmers want, so they know exactly how much they can be charged. And these laws are going to make it illegal to do price discrimination. To charge one group one price and another group another price. Those of you who were here Wednesday, you saw some price discrimination at the very end. With Carnegie negotiated a deal where he got a 40% rebate on his barrels, which made him be able to charge less for his oil, yada, yada, yada. Right, same idea. It's going to allow things to be more fair. So the farmers are all going to be charged the same price because they're all shipping things the same distance. Who are Granger laws good for? Farmers. Yeah, because they're put in place by the Granger movement that's facilitating farmer supports. This is going to actually evolve from a social movement into an economic movement called the Farmers Alliance. The Farmers Alliance. I'm going to talk about the political manifestation of this at the very end of this unit because it's a perfect exclamation point to this era. The Farmers Alliance is an economic movement in nature in which farmers are going to organize to pool resources together. They're going to organize to try to help build some economic credibility by saying their strength in numbers. Right? To control their own crop prices. To do things like say, hey, my crop's going to sell the corn for the same price as yours is, and yours is, and yours is, so that we don't get screwed by the railroads. We're going to sell the exact same price. Economic activism. They're going to pool resources together. They're going to say like, hey, all 10 of our farms in this area give us one rate to ship all of our stuff together. Economic activism. Now there's two court cases to note that both deal exactly with this that I'll ask you to commit to memory. The first is Munn versus Illinois, which is decided by the Supreme Court in 1877. And I ask you, is this good for farmers or not? Let's decide. In Munn versus Illinois, the Supreme Court ruled that states, so Idaho, Nebraska, Colorado, all these western states, the states are allowed to regulate any industry that affects the common good. Any industry that affects society as a whole, like railroads. Let me ask you something. Is this ruling good for railroads? Excuse me, is this ruling good for farmers or not? Allowing the states to regulate any industry that deals with the common good.
No.
Why not? Isn't that what farmers want? Don't the farmers want the government to regulate the railroads? Yes or no?
Yeah.
If you're a farmer, do you want the railroads to be regulated or not? Yes or no?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So is this ruling good or not for farmers?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think the government in Washington, D.C. is going to regulate railroads? No. But if they have all their state governments to regulate the railroads, that's helpful. In a sense, what this does is it upholds or allows for Granger laws that we just talked about and other measures against railroad companies. It makes it easier to regulate railroads. That's good for farmers. Unfortunately, 9 years later, they're going to overturn their own ruling. And they're going to say, no, sorry, states cannot set any rates. States can't tell you what they can charge on any interstate commerce. Only the federal government can regulate interstate commerce. Been over that before. Gibbons v. Ogden, the steamboat way back in the day. Only the federal government can regulate interstate commerce, and railroads, since they go across states, they count as interstate commerce, and only the federal government can regulate that. Now, who's richer? These farmers or Vanderbilt? Vanderbilt. So, who's going to get their way at the federal level, the federal government? Farmers or Vanderbilt? Ah, there's the problem. They can get their state representatives to help them out, but the government in Washington, D.C. is going to answer to big money, like Vanderbilt, and they're not going to regulate railroads, which is going to allow for railroads to keep doing their thing. So the response here, super important last point before we get to our last cartoon and call it a day, is the Interstate Commerce Act. Congress says, fine, we'll regulate interstate commerce. We'll pass a new act. This is the first attempt, it's important to note, the first attempt to regulate interstate commerce in a meaningful way on behalf of consumers, the Interstate Commerce Act of 1887. Unfortunately, they pass this act, but they don't really enforce this act. They don't do anything to force people to follow it. It's unenforced. It fails to regulate railroad rates. And in the long run, in many ways, does more harm than good. The big takeaway here that I want you to carry through this unit is that farmers continue to be the victims of industrial and financial institutions. Railroads are going to keep screwing farmers. Manufacturers that are selling them goods are going to keep screwing farmers. Bankers are going to keep screwing farmers. Farmers are going to have a really hard time throughout. And we'll often see the same thing with the working class. We'll see the same thing with the everyday people throughout this Gilded Age of the post-Civil War industrial era. Farmers continue to be the victims of industrial and financial hardship. All right. I can save the natives for another day, but we are going to finish. We'll see. We're going to finish with this awesome poster from farmers. Oh, you're breaking things over there? Oh, Jesus Christ. All right, take two at your table, please, to discuss the historical context of this piece of media, this advertisement, this poster. What's background for this? What's happening that makes this make sense? And what is this cartoon's point of view? What is this in favor of or opposed to? Take two, talk together, chat it out. What do you see up here? What might this poster be trying to argue or demonstrate or put forth? 2 minutes, go. Go, chat me out. Chat me out, chat me out. We're not finishing like this. Go. 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 What do we got? Yeah. What you guys got? At least point of view. What is this cartoon arguing? What's this in favor of? Yeah. Keep going. What about the farmers? Good. Right? They should be respected. They're central to society. Everyone else has other things, but the one that's important to everybody is the farmers. Put that for people, right? In favor of supporting farmers. Good job, Joseph. Focus on POV. Who is this in favor of or opposed to? What is this trying to argue about the farmer situation? All right, what's background? Why might farmers feel the need to even make this point? If the farmers are respected and doing well, would they have to make this point? No, Daisy, talk to me.
What is the context with the development of railroads?
Sure, development of railroads part of it. Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm going to argue like bigger picture. You can use context as farmer struggles. Right? The challenges that farmers are facing on the frontier. I saw Caesar put like post-Civil War industrial growth that's making life difficult for farmers. Absolutely. Absolutely. And here we have all these other occupations, right? Bankers, lawyers, railroad men, politicians, soldiers, sailors, market merchants. But who's the most important group in society according to this perspective?
Farmers.
Farmers, right? They're the ones that connect everything. I feed you all. What is this farmer actually saying? If I saying I feed you all, what's he trying to get at?
They provide.
What?
They provide.
They provide. Right? They should be what? Respected. They should be treated with dignity and respect and treated with the same kind of honor we give elsewhere. I feed you all. It's very pro-farmer. So I ask you that last question. Why are farmers largely unable to create change? Based on your chapter that you've read and what you've learned at this point, why do you think farmers were unable to get their way in this era?
How they're not really high on the, like the maintenance.
High on the what?
Like being elite,
Okay, cool.
like middle class and low class.
They're middle class and low class, so they lack liquid assets. I agree. Why else? What is the government passing policies to do throughout this entire unit? To facilitate what? What kind of growth? You got both chapters, one that's due today and the one that is due on Wednesday. What is the government continuing to do with policies? Facilitate what? Industrial growth. Railroads, tariffs, anti-regulation of business, laissez-faire policies. Because the government is facilitating industrial growth, that often happens at the expense of the farming classes. All right. I'm going to go ahead and stop there, since the bell's going to ring in just a minute or two.